Welcome to a new video lesson. Actually, this lesson is a bit different from the previous lessons that I have uploaded over here. This is different in the sense that all the previous lessons that I have uploaded here were uploaded because of the lockdown effect, because of my willing to teach. But this video is a request from one of the pass out students that it might be a help for his future career, for his entrance exam. I don't know how much how justifiable it will be to do this, because all I will be saying here without any script, okay, without any script, without any prior planning of anything, prior planning of the choice of words or the text. What I will be doing over here is I will be giving an overview of Indian writing in English. This overview will be focusing on not just the development of the Indian writing in English through different phases, but also it will focus on several novelists and the characteristics of several poets that we see over years who have been there in the syllabus, okay, different syllabuses, especially in UG courses. So before I start, I would like to say that it would not focus on just the development of Indian writing, but it will also focus on some of the novelists, some of the poets, and let's see where it ends. And everything that I will be speaking over here will be focused on the special text, special language English, which has been Indianized in due course, our Indian writing in English, which has made a special space in our heart. So Indian writing in English can be broadly divided into 4 phases, okay. Number 1, the old and the initial period, where the writers were still groping with the challenges of writing in a foreign language, and therefore usually retorted to mere imitation, okay. So when any writing or any language starts, or any writing in any language which is different from your mother tongue or native language starts, it is obvious that it will begin with imitation, okay. So it was difficult for earlier writers to write in ways, write about the things in a fluent way, and to find out themes which would be suitable to write in foreign language. So the challenges of writing in a foreign language was thing that needs to be overcome, or that needed to be overcome, okay. So for them, they, in a way to write, they tried to imitate the style of the English writers in order to satisfy their wish to write about their own themes, about their own society, about the India, about their presence, about their cultures, but merely copying the stance, merely copying the way in which the people of England, or the European countries rather, wrote, okay. The second phase is the period of Indianization. So first was imitation, second is Indianization, okay. The second phase is period is of Indianization, and it included writers like Torudutt, Sarojini Naidu, and Ramesh Chandra Dutt. Okay. The third phase entailed the spirit of growing Indianization. Okay, so this Indianization was growing as the writers were coming to terms with the use of English as a foreign language. Okay, so this percolation of the foreign language has taken a deep impact on the native land, on the native writers, and this has this has given them a scope to express their own feelings by Indianizing the ideas, or the Indianizing the ways in which they were writing. Okay, so these are the three phases that were seen, and the fourth phase, or the last phase of development, or the last phase of in this period of experimentation is where the writer gets confident enough to explore and subvert the language to his own need. Okay, so these are the four phases. So it is like the growth of any child. Okay, as a child grows when it is in its early nascent stage, it merely copies the big other. Okay, the child copies the elders, right? So what we see here is that similarly, in case of a language too, which is like a child, it copies the big other, it copies the language, the foreign language in which it is present, and what we see here is that this copying does help it to grow to a bit. But as child grows, it creates its own nuances, it creates its own ideologies, it creates its, not ideologies to be perfect, it creates its own way of dealing with things, right? That is what Indianization is taking place, irrespective of any native language that is present in India. Okay, so when they are writing in a foreign language, especially English, which is a colonizer's language, and we know the history of the colonizer, how this language came to our land, right? With all the missionaries coming in there, establishing colleges, schools, and imparting English education. I am not going into that, right? So what we see here is that, like a child, this language is also growing, first by imitating, then by creating its own things to be imposed in their own life. Okay, so what we are seeing here is that the child is creating things, like the language, native language is creating things in order to place its own identity, the language's own identity, into English. Clear? Similarly, in the same way, this idea is growing, this way of dealing is growing, this Indianization is growing. As the child grows, its nuances, its ways of dealing with things increases. Okay, so this thing is growing, and ultimately when the child becomes independent, it has its own way of dealing with things. Similarly, as this native language is strong enough, they have a strong hold over the foreign language, they can use that language, that foreign language, to meet their own needs, to use, they are using language, they are confident in so many ways that they explore and even subvert the language to satisfy their own end. Okay, so what we see here is that their development, their language development, the history of English literature, here in especially Indian English literature, is developing first through imitation, then through Indianization, then through the gradual more phase, the third phase is the growing of this Indianization, and fourth and the last phase is the experimentation. Okay, where the new things are being incorporated as a child experiments with his ways of living, ways of doing things similarly. Clear? In the history of English poetry in India, one finds that Henry Vivian Derozio and Michael Madhusudan Datta are the early practitioners of English words, and were followed by Toru Dutt, Manmohan Ghosh, Sarojini Naidu and Ramesh Chandra Datta. The early or the achievements of Ramesh Chandra Datta as a poet during his stay in England are comparable to those of Manmohan Ghosh, who had earned recognition as a poet during his stay in England. What we also see that these are the people who have access to the land of the colonizer, and not just because of the missionaries and everything who brought English. Obviously that created interest, and that created a sense of otherness, which led them to accept another language, which is the colonizer's language, which is the language more powerful, more dominant one. So what we see here is that these kind of people who are able to write have in some way access to the colonizer's land. I will come to that later on, but what we see here is that this the contemporary poets of the post 1947 era, who are well known names like Dom Morris, A.K. Ramanujan, even before that also. So P. Lal, though P. Lal is after partition, R. Parthasarathi and Nisam Ezekiel, who mostly share the modernist tradition of English poetry. Okay, so there is this kind of difference that is being portrayed, this difference is being made. The Indian novel in English, as compared to novels in other Indian languages, had a relatively low start. Okay, so it started with K.S. Venkataraman's Murugan the Tiller. Murugan the Tiller is the title, which was published in 1927, I think. 1927. Constantly, it is a work, or you can say consistently, it is a work on the Gandhian principle or the Gandhian economics. Okay. The readers witnessed the arrival of the famous trio of Indian writing in English novels. They are Mulk Rajanand, Raja Rao and R.K. Narayan. Okay. The history of English novel in the 18th century, from Daniel Defoe onwards, shows that the novel as an art form is essentially a social document. Right? If you remember the writings of Daniel Defoe and everything, even for Charles Dickens also, it is a representation of the society. Especially in Dickens, it is a representation of London. But what we see here is that the novel comes as an art form which gives a picture of the society. Okay, it is a social document. Similarly, the Indian novels in English, which seems to have followed the back of the early English novel. Okay, so it follows the tradition of the English novel, as it has already incorporated within it the immediate context that were present during those early 20th century. Okay, for the context like the nationalist movement, or the themes like the East-West conflict, the Gandhian ideology, the struggle for independence, and various social and economic issues, such as casteism, poverty, and industrial development. So what we see here is that the texts, the novels, were mainly focused on the issues which were deeply rooted in Indian consciousness. So, and also the themes which we see here is that the idea that we see that are represented are more or less related to the social ideology, social context, and what more or less in a way which represent or pictures the society of those times, as in the case of English novels also when they grew. So what we see here is that in this kind of writing, the Gandhi's ideology is represented. For example, in Waiting for Mahatma, or the rural society is being depicted, where the people or even the kids are influenced by the movements of civil disobedience and non-cooperation movement, and on the Swadesi movement, whatever, like Swami and Friends and everything. Even social conditions, as I said, like casteism is shown through the writings of Mulk Raj Anand and Raja Rao, like in Untouchable. Okay, so what we see here is that this economic and the social issues, poverty, industrial development, and the caste system, nationalist movement, everything which has been in the core feelings or the core happenings of the society, in core happenings of the Indian society, find a representation in the form of fictions, in the form of novel writing through these writers. Okay, as they had a grip over the foreign language, and what we see here is that they are getting more and more opportunity, they are getting more and more opportunity to express the feelings of the Indianness, the condition of the Indianness, to a larger audience when they are writing in English, right? So what we see here is that this development has helped in the representation of the society, which was important, but what it also put a mirror to the society, and it has also become a historical document also. Though the question remains, in a fiction, how can you put it as a historical document? But what we see here is that as these writings are representation of the society, as representations of the things that are happening in the society, all the evils, all the good things that are happening in the society, it gives a hint of the historical things that were happening and the problems that were present in those times. Okay, in the post-independence era, however, there is a dramatic shift. The dramatic shift was to the colonial period. Okay, so there is a re-examination of the imperialism after the post-independence era. What we see in the novels is that there is this multiculturalism of Indian society which is coming into the texts. Okay, so there is a constant and gradual development and constant presentation of a society which is at one instance the casteist society. It is a poverty-stricken society which believes in the East-West conflict or represents the East-West conflict. Wherever when there is this independence or the shift of power, the change in the attitude that comes along is the, what can we say, there is a look back or the re-examination of the imperialism, whether it was good or whether what were the conditions in those times. that were seen through this poetry. Um, Also, there is this psychoanalysis of the national identity, okay, that is also coming into this um, as a theme of the novels. Similarly, and the emergence of India as a sovereign nation, which became more and more important and clear theme of these times. Similarly, another thing that was happening was the kind of diaspora writing. Okay, so this diaspora writing has its upstarts and this belongingness to your native home when you are writing from the other country. So it is whether it is Salman Rushdie or V.S. Naipaul. These writings are about India. These writings about his belongingness to India or this connection with India. But what we see here is that they are not situated in India. They have moved away from here, or have been transported, or have taken birth in different places. So this idea of homelessness, this idea of belongingness also becomes an issue, becomes a theme in the later novels of the post-independent era. Okay, so as in case of V.S. Naipaul's House of Mr. Viswas, which upstages the issue of homelessness and exile, not only of Mr. Biswas but of the writer himself, who finds himself precariously poised between two cultures. Okay, Naipaul's poignant treatment of the history of 300 years of struggle of East Indian indentured labor in Trinidad shows that the capitalist colonial structure, with its attendant gifts of poverty, ugliness, and class structure, has permanently destroyed the potential of Mr. Biswas as a writer. Okay, thus symphoning him into the irrecoverable state of alienation, fear, and despair. Okay, so this kind of writing is coming up. This feeling of homelessness, this feeling of alienation, this feeling of not being able to be at home, this diaspora writing is coming into place. The sincerity, the forgetfulness, or whatever you say, the intensity with which or the faithfulness with which Naipaul examines socio-historical conditions, as I said before, though they cannot be treated as historical documents, fictions cannot be treated as historical documents, but they are a representation of the socio-historical conditions, right? Though these novels are reflection of the historical or the social conditions of those times. So Naipaul, when examines these socio-historical conditions, especially the colonial person and the colonial reality, all these are also seen in the novels of Mulk Raj Anand and even Raja Rao. Okay, while Mulk Raj Anand and Raja Rao are directly involved with the socio-political realities, here is the difference. When they are involved with the socio-political realities, Naipaul is not. Okay. On the other hand, also these writers, Mulk Raj Anand and Raja Rao, clearly seem to be involved with the socio-political realities, whereas R.K. Narayan, on the other hand, remains aloof. He depicts a situation, depicts the social condition, but in somewhat keeping a distance from it. He concentrates on realities of human existence, intertwined with the intermittent ironies, whatever it can be said in that way. Okay. Similarly, the achievements of Bhavani Bhattacharya, Manohar Malgonkar, Sudhir Ghosh, Kamala Markandaya, Khushwant Singh, and, whoever are there. Um, they all this cannot be swept aside. Okay, so in terms of their inevitable preoccupation with the history of pre-independent or the pre-independence of India, and the changes of the social reality, one can say that one can see some sort of common ground between Bhattacharya and Malgaonkar. Okay, so when we see here is that this might seem aloof for you people because you do not know the names or you do not know the text. I would just suggest, because in this short video it would be difficult for me to explain all the text. You go and read a brief summary of all the text that I am mentioning. It would be a great help. Okay, I think so. Okay, so when we see this common ground, we can see a common ground between Bhattacharya and Malgaonkar. Okay, which we see in Bhattacharya's novel So Many Hungers, or which still remains a classic fictional narrative of the war years. Okay, so even Malgaonkar's A Bend in the Ganges, which was published in 1964, is a historical narrative, much in the tradition of Walter Scott, dealing with the collusive impact of World War II. So Many Hungers was published in 1947, the famous year or the infamous one, whatever you say. So what we see here is that they are writing mostly Malgaonkar's this novel is written in the tradition of Walter Scott, which deals with the reality of the World War II, with the impact of the World War II, rather British colonialism and India's struggle for freedom. Similarly, as you have read, I think, the Train to Pakistan, Khushwant Singh Train to Pakistan, 1956, with its imaginary creation of Mano Manjra, okay, is indisputably a significant work on the subject of what can you say, Indian division or the bifurcation of the subcontinent. The metaphors of untouchable, as I mentioned before also, in the novel Untouchable, which was published in 1935, and Coolie in Coolie, are what can you say? There's just they are not just socio historic metaphors of enslavement, subjugation, and servitude and dispossession. They are the realities of those times. Okay, what we see here is that they become a metaphor. The metaphor of the untouchable in the untouchable is not just related to only the titular character or the coolie. All we see here is that the socio-economic condition, the condition of the people who are not talked about. What we say, what we talk about is Gandhi, what we talk about is Nehru, what we talk about is the Indian independence, and Netaji. Netaji is rather removed from novels, okay, or the fictionalized forms, though there are many reasons behind that. Whatever. So what we see here is that this the important thing over here is that these unsaid words of unknown people, these faceless people, are felt, seen, and encaptured through these novels, through these writings. Okay, so a novel, Mano Manjra, Train to Pakistan, where Mano Manjra, where the essence of India or the essence of the post-partition or the partition, the years of partition, is clearly felt. Okay, so it can be on either side. It can be a nameless province also, but the impact of the society, impact of partition on the society is significantly presented. Clear? So what we see here is that at one hand there is a larger scheme of things that are happening, okay, like the partition, the Gandhian ideology which has swept over the whole India. Only one ideology that has been propagated throughout India because of the popularity of one party and one person who has become a Baba, idea of ideological Baba, Gandhi Baba, right? He has become the father of the nation later. So what we see here is that at one hand we see this huge round of huge idea which has swept over the whole nation, that is being projected, and on the other hand we are talking about, the novels are talking about people who are not being projected, who are not being considered, right, Baka? Okay, so the characters of Untouchable, the coolie, we do not consider them, even the guide, even in guide, okay. So these characters we are not considering, we are not taking into account, but these characters, these novels are presenting the other side of the coin, the other side of the society which has not, which are not followed by us, okay. So they become representation of enslavement, they becomes a metaphor of enslavement, subjugation, even servitude, dispossession. They become the history, they are the representations of the socio-political, socio-economic history, okay, of those times. They are the representatives of that. Similarly, the East-West encounter that Foster dramatizes in A Passage to India is represented in the struggles of the Cambridge educated Krishnan who has returned to India, his native home, in Balachandran Rajan's The Dark Dancer. The Dark Dancer is the novel. Okay, so we can also trace Krishnan's search for the identity in the post-independent India. Okay, so this post-independent era has left us with a more subtle and most what can you say, turning ideology, most turning factor, where we see that it is mostly focused on our ingrained soul to find what we are within, our own identity. Society to theek hai, we are finding, we are seeing about the society, right? But most importantly what we see here is that we are also trying to find what we actually are, where we actually stand, okay. So the post-independent era has witnessed the emergence of a large number of women writers too. The works of such writers as Kamala Markandaya, with others like Anita Desai, Atiya Hussain, Nayantara Saigal, and others, simply shows that the Indian women writers have vigorously and effectively responded to the conflictual developments in a newly evolving post-colonial culture, okay. So the representation of women are coming in late but coming in handy also. So what we see here is that this ideology, how all these ideologies that were present in some context, in most of the contexts, are being represented through different writers, different women writers, in different ways that we are seeing, okay. So I will continue about some other writers, mainly Kamala Markandaya, Anita Desai, Shashi Deshpande, R.K. Narayan, obviously. He is one of my favorites. beside Mulk Rajanand and Raja Rao. There is this feeling with Narayan. There is this naive yet poignant feeling with Narayan, which leaves a stamp on you, a deep impact on you, though which is a subtle one. Whereas in Mulk Rajanand or Raja Rao, or especially Mulk Rajanand, it is a hard-hitting truth that he speaks. Whatever, I will speak on those writers in another video lesson. Hopefully this will be of any help. This will give you a rough idea of how Indian writing in English started and how it has been developed. Okay, thank you.